Well, in all seriousness, there's some serious business here. There's something happened here this week at the Vineyard that I know is going to disturb some of you, but just for the sake of disclosure, the truth must be told. This past Monday morning, I was walking back to the back of the sanctuary there. It was still dark there. I didn't have any lights turned on. I noticed something that looked like a big leaf in the middle of the floor, and so I bent over to pick it up, and it started flapping around. It was a bat. Now, I suspect that some of you just this moment decided that you're leaving the Vineyard and that you're never coming back. But before you do, before you leave the church, I would remind you that the expression bats in the belfry, that actually derived from the fact that bats like to hang out literally in churches, or at least in church bell towers. And so I guess the point is, if you're hoping to find a church that doesn't have bats in its belfry, either literally or metaphorically, I think that we are just as batty, or everybody else is just as batty as we are here, okay? So you might as well just put up with the bats of the belfry here. But for your peace of mind, for those of you who are seriously freaked out right now, you should know that I did capture the bat. I did capture it, and I think I've gotten all of them, maybe. But this process of capturing the bat, it involved a couple things. First of all, it involved skills that I did not learn in seminary for some reason. I must have skipped that class or that day. And it was also a process that involved oven mitts. So, sorry, Mary, I apologize. I apologize to the kitchen hospitality team. Ted. I can neither confirm nor deny what my dish is made out of. Only one person will be able to take a bite, though, so I don't know if that kind of gives you a hint. Now, there's actually a point to this story which does connect to our Bible passage in Hebrews chapter 13. If you would have asked me the question a week ago, hey, Kent, how do you feel about bats? I would have said something like, bats are good creatures. They are an important part of our ecosystem. They eat insects. They play a very important role in keeping our mosquito population in check. And we need to be especially concerned about bats right now because our bat population is decreasing significantly. So save the bats. That's what I would have said. I like bats, and I'm committed to bats in a very abstract, philosophical, theoretical, and academic kind of way. But on Monday morning, when I encountered a real-life bat up close and personal, that was like snarling its fangs at me and flapping its creepy little wings and doing one of these numbers, with its evil claws. And I'm pretty sure it was calling me names. That on Monday morning was when it occurred to me that I only like bats in an abstract, philosophical, theoretical, academic kind of way. But I'm not really a big fan of real bats personally, in a practical way. Bats up close and personal are a little strange and creepy. I like bats philosophically, but I'm not really comfortable with real bats. I'm even okay with boxed-in bats, but when bats are like free to invade my space, to choose to do what bats do, I'm not a big fan of those kinds of bats. Bats don't fall in the category of creatures with which I naturally feel like these warm fuzzies. Oh, look at the cute little bat. Don't you just want to kiss it and hug? I like dogs. I'm comfortable with dogs. Most dogs. Well, what in the world does that have to do with the book of Hebrews? Well, today's passage talks about loving other people. talks about brotherly love. And I find in my own life that I am completely committed to the idea of loving other people in an abstract, philosophical, theoretical, and academic kind of way, and even in a theological kind of way. But in practical, concrete, up close and personal, real life, everyday encounters with actual real life other people, I find, well, let's just say, I find that I'm more completely committed to the idea of loving other people in abstract, philosophical, theoretical, and theological kind of ways. You know what I'm talking about? I suspect you may be wired like this too. Like me, you may find that loving other people, not in the abstract, but in the particular, is more difficult because other people, maybe a little bit like bats, can be a little bit strange or unusual or different to you, or because you just don't feel comfortable with some other people or with certain other people, or because they just don't fall in the category of individuals with whom you feel natural, warm fuzzies, right? Honestly? Sure. Sometimes we find that loving others, not in the abstract, but in particular, is difficult because sometimes people snarl at us, right? They do one of these things to us. And it's a little harder to love people in particular, not theoretically, but in particular when they snarl at us. And so I recognize in myself, and you may recognize in yourself as well, a certain hypocrisy between our philosophical declarations of brotherly love and our actual application of brotherly love. And if it's any comfort, we're not alone in our hypocrisy. There's a great section in the classic work, The Brothers Karamazov, by Fyodor Dostoevsky, where he's really articulating this intrinsic hypocrisy between our philosophical declaration of brotherly love and our actual practice of it. And so here's a dialogue that takes place between a couple different characters. It's kind of a nested dialogue, so it's hard to figure out who's saying what, but it's not important who's saying what. It's just important what is being said. So, Brothers Karamazov. The character says, I love mankind. I love mankind, but I'm amazed at myself. The more I love mankind in general, the less I love people in particular. And that is individually as separate persons. In my dreams, I often went so far as to think passionately of serving mankind, and it may be I would really have gone to the cross for people if it were somehow suddenly necessary. And yet, I'm incapable of living in the same room with anyone for even 2 days. I know this from experience. As soon as someone is there close to me, his personality oppresses me, oppresses my self-esteem, and restricts my freedom. And in 24 hours, I can begin to hate even the best of men. One, because he takes too long eating his dinner, and another because he has a cold and keeps blowing his nose. I become the enemy of people the moment they touch me. On the other hand, it has always happened that the more I hate people individually, the more ardent becomes my love for humanity as a whole. Isn't that great? We're just like this character, aren't we? Let's face it. And anybody, I won't ask for a show of hands. You want to admit, yeah, that kind of sounds like me a little bit. Yeah, there's a couple people who want to admit it. All right, well, let's see what the Bible then has to say about real life brotherly love. Not theoretical brotherly love, but real life brotherly love in Hebrews 13, 1 through 3. I'm going to read the whole passage in context, and then we're going to break it down a little bit. Hebrews 13, 1 through 3. Keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it. Remember those in prison as if you were there yourself, and remember also those being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own bodies. And so in these words, the author of Hebrews has in mind shaping the way that you and I choose to relate to one another as brothers and sisters. In other words, how we actually conduct ourselves in real life, practical, concrete ways in the household of faith. And so these instructions, you need to understand, I'm going to tap on this a couple times. These instructions are not given to mankind in general. These instructions are for us in the way that we relate to one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. And the author here is not trying to inform our theology of Christian community. He's meaning to form our practice of Christian community. You hear that? He doesn't want us to think about these things. He wants us to do these things. This is the practice of Christian community, the way it looks when you and I have both feet in. We're all in the family of God. We're all in the community of faith. And so the first quality that we see in these words of real life, practical, this is where the rubber hits the road, both feet in Christian community, we see in the words of verse 1. Keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. Keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. Does anybody know or want to guess what the original Bible word here, the Greek word is for, I've underlined the phrase, loving each other as brothers and sisters. There's only one word there behind all of the English words. Anybody know or guess? Philadelphia. It is the literal Greek word. I've written there for you Greek people. Philadelphia. Philadelphia. It's where we get the name of the city. Philadelphia. Brotherly love. Phila means love. Delphia means brothers. Love for the brothers. And so the command here to us in the community faith is keep on Philadelphia-ing. Keep on brotherly loving. And so what is this practical quality of brotherly love? Brotherly love is practically, that means in practice, it's commitment. That is what is meant here. Brotherly love is commitment love. What does it look like when you and I have both feet in? I tell you what it looks like. It looks like Philadelphia love. It looks like commitment. Well, why is brotherly love commitment? Well, think of it this way. For those of you who have siblings, when is your flesh and blood brother not your brother? Never. Never. Your flesh and blood brother, like it or not, is your brother. He's always your brother. He's never going to not be your brother. Nothing can break the flesh and blood family bond. It's like the old saying your friends you can choose, but your family, you're stuck with. Your friends you can choose, your family you're stuck with. And that's really what the biblical authors are trying to capture here in our attitude towards our brothers and sisters in Christ. Look around the room. Brothers, this is who is meant here. In our attitude towards one another right here, the biblical authors are employing this word, Philadelphia, to characterize Christian community. Philadelphia, brotherly love is commitment to one another, not philosophically. Not philosophical, theoretical, theological commitment, but practical commitment that says, no matter what, we're flesh and blood in Jesus. My brother is my brother, and my sister is my sister, and nothing is going to break our family bond. So let me give you two attitudes that characterize then this real life Philadelphia, practical, brotherly love. I've got both feet in kind of commitment. The first attitude is, I'll be there for you. That would make actually a great line to a song. I'll be there for you. These 5 words, I swear to you. Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. All right. Some of you have no idea. What is he talking about? All right. Why is this important? Because our society's definition of commitment, our society's attitude towards commitment, and I would suggest to you that the definition of commitment that we have adopted from our society without even realizing it. Our society's definition of commitment is, I'll be there for you if there's something in it for me. I'll be there for you if I need something from you. And I expect you to be there for me, especially when I need something. But if I don't need something from you, if I don't need something, then I'll be there if I feel like it. That's our society's definition. But the biblical attitude of Philadelphia, of brotherly love, is commitment. I'll be there for you no matter what. We're family. We gather together as a family, and when we gather together as a family, like we're gathered here, I'll be here for the family. I will be here for you, whether I need it or whether not. Whether you need it or not, I'll be there for you. And when we gather together in small group communities, in our life groups, I'll be there no matter what. I'll be there for you. If I'm in need, I'll be there. If I'm not in need, I'll be there. If you're in need, I'll be there. If you're not in need, I'll be there. I'll be there. Oh, now there's another song. I'll be there. That's for you older people, all right? Who did that song? Jackson 5. I'll be there. Just call my name. I'll be there. Actually, that's not even the biblical attitude of Philadelphia. It's not just call my name, I'll be there. It's just I'll be there, period. I like it. So, in other words, Bon Jovi, better theology than Jackson 5. Bon Jovi, I'll be there for you. Better theology than I'll be there if you just call my name. It's, right, okay, never mind. I'm kind of bogging down in. Bon Jovi, better theology than Jackson 5. There's a sound bite for a sermon right there. All right, so that's the first attitude that characterizes real life, practical, both feed in Philadelphia brotherly love. It's commitment that says, I'll be there. I'll be there for you. I'll just be there, period. Well, the second attitude that characterizes real life, practical, both feed in Philadelphia brotherly love commitment is, I'll stick it out. I'll see it through. And again, you can understand why the biblical authors employed this phrase, Philadelphia, brotherly love, to convey stick it out if, again, you had siblings growing up. You know, if you had siblings growing up, your brother and or sister drove you nuts, right? Siblings can fight about anything at any time, anywhere. Quit looking at me! Mommy's looking at me! Right? But you also know that family sticks it out. Your family. You're going to go the distance. Your brother is your brother. Your sister is your sister. Family sees it through. And so the biblical authors employed this word, Philadelphia, the love for the brothers, because it's the exact same thing is true in the family of God. Sibling squabbles in the family of God are inevitable. Well, right? They're inevitable. Because we're different. Some of you are weird. No, it's just like, it's the bad thing. That's the connection here. Some of you are different. We're unusual. We're all unusual to one another. We can drive each other nuts. We can misunderstand one another. We can, and probably will, inevitably hurt one another, but family sticks it out. Family sticks it out. Family sees it through. No matter what, I'll be there for you. I'm not walking out on you. And I don't mean that in a philosophical way. Doesn't that sound so nice? But this is practical, real life, where the rubber hits the road, Christianity. I've got both feet in. And I'll be there for you, and I'm going to see it through. Commitment. That's the first quality of Christian community. The next quality, then, of real life, practical Christian community is acceptance. Acceptance. We see this illustrated for us in verse 2. So don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it. Now, where do we see the word? Where do we see the concept or the quality of acceptance in these words? Well, first of all, let me quickly remind you that as we saw before, the author of Hebrews in these verses has in view our actions with regard to the household of faith. He has Philadelphia here, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, the family of God. And so Hebrews 13:2 is not saying, make sure that you show hospitality to anyone and everyone in the whole wide world. Okay? That's not what's being commanded here. That's a good thing. That's a fine thing. You can do that. It's not saying you can't do that. But the author of Hebrews is not commanding hospitality to anybody and everybody in the whole wide world. But what he is saying, what is being commanded of us is that we show hospitality to anyone and everyone in the family. To anyone and everyone in the family. And we're going to see that it's true also in the next verse, that when we see about visiting those who are imprisoned and those who are being mistreated, he doesn't mean those who are imprisoned or mistreated anywhere and everywhere in the world. He has in mind within the household of faith. All right, and I say that not to water down the teaching here, but just to clarify the context in which the author of Hebrews is giving these commands. You understand what I'm saying? He clearly has in view the household of faith. All right, so anyway, that's kind of a tangent. Where do we get the quality of acceptance then from these words? Well, it may be interesting for you to know that in the same way that the author used the word in the previous verse, Philadelphia, to say we need to love the brothers, he used almost an identical word here in verse 2, which is philoxenias. Philadelphia, philoxenia, which just literally translate love, the philo part, and xenias, which is from xenos, love of the strange, love of the unusual, love for the different. In other words, keep on loving our brothers and sisters in the household of faith who are not just unknown to us, but who are literally strange to us or foreign to us. In other words, who are not like us. Anybody see the movie, it's an older movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding? See the wedding? I remember Tula brings her boyfriend / fiance home to her Greek family, and her father says, "What? You know, who is this? No, is he a nice Greek boy? No, Greek. He's a Xeno. A Xeno, it's the same word, Xeno, a foreigner, he's a stranger, he's unusual. He's a Xeno with the big long hairs on top of his head." You remember that scene? Like big fat. All right, that's the word here, Xeno. He's not like us. He's not Greek like us. He's a foreigner. He's different. And that is the word that the author is using here in the household of faith that we need to maintain. We need to make sure that we don't forget loving those who are Xeno. They're not like me. They're different. They're a little bit foreign to me. Don't forget to love the Xeno. Why is this important? Well, it would have been very important in the biblical times because in the early church, as you know, we literally had Greeks worshiping Jesus together in the family of God along with Jews. And they were Xenos to one another. We don't like Greeks. They're not like us, the Greeks. We don't like the Jews. They're not like us. And so the author of Hebrews had to remind the church, this is the way it looks when you've got both feet in, doing brotherhood, not in an esoteric academic way, but in a real way. Don't forget to keep on loving people who are Xenos to you. They're a little bit different. They're not quite like you. Maybe a little bit frightening to you. All right, and that's important for us, even still today. We don't have maybe the huge cultural, the ethnic cultural divides, but there are divides in the church, right? There are still divides from people who are not alike. We're all very different. I think if we were to be honest, we'd all admit that it's in our nature, or at least it's certainly in our practice, to like or to be comfortable with, or to love others, or to show hospitality towards those who are most like me, right? Most like us. And if you think about it, if who you most love and of who you best love, the only kind of people who, are most like you, and the only kind of people that, you show hospitality towards are the people who are most like you, then what kind of love is it that we're really exercising in our life? It's self-love, right? I like you. I'm not sure why I like you so much. Oh, I think I do know why I like you so much. You remind me of me, and I love me, right? That's the way we're like. That's what we're like. And so the author of Hebrews is making a point to remind us that true brotherly love, not philosophical brotherly love, but real life practical where the rubber hits the road, brotherly love is a commitment that is open-armed and open-hearted and open-homed and open-stuffed, showing hospitality with my stuff, opening my stuff. And it's aimed towards anyone and everyone in the family. Those who are like us and those who are not like us. Those who are familiar, those who are comfortable, and those who are xeno to us. Love the stranger. That's acceptance. Right? And that plays itself out in very practical ways. The best way to do community, the best way to do brotherly love here in this church is to be a part of a life group. You need to commit yourself to a life group. If your name isn't on one of those lists, if you didn't show up in a group this past week, you don't have both feet in this community. If you're in this community of faith, you don't have both feet in if you're not in a life group. If you're not committed to being there for others and allowing others to be there for you, you don't have both feet in. But practically, when we are in life groups, it's just a mixture of all sorts of different people, different ages, different stations in life, different challenges, different struggles. And what an opportunity for us to put into practice the love of those who may not quite be like me. And what an opportunity for me to grow out of being somebody who is just a lover of self and a lover of those who are like myself, to a lover of those who are different from me. That's what it looks like to have both feet in. It's commitment, it's acceptance. All right, and the third quality of real-life practical Christian community is risk. Risk. We see risk illustrated for us in verse 3. Remember those in prison as if you were there yourself, and remember also those being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own bodies. There's actually so much I wanted to talk on in this passage, or in this passage, but in these verses this morning, and we're just not going to have enough time. Remember those in prison as if you were there yourself, and remember those also being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own bodies. Well, where do we get risk from these words? All right, now you need to remember, if you've been here for a while, that all the way back in chapter 10, picking up in about verse 32, we saw that the readers of the book of Hebrews, the readers of the original letter, were being praised because even in the face of persecution, they were helping other brothers and sisters in the faith who were being made fun of, and they were being ridiculed, and they were being persecuted, and they were actually being thrown in jail. And even amongst the whole group of them, their possessions were being seized. Their property was being illegally seized, and they were accepting it all with joy. You remember that back 10:32 and following? And so those words in chapter 10 provide the backdrop in front of which verse 3 here in chapter 13 is being written. So in other words, church, continue to remember your brothers and sisters in the faith who are being persecuted and imprisoned. And so again, it's helpful to understand here, it's important to understand that these words then are not necessarily written to command that we as Christ followers should remember anyone and everyone who is imprisoned or mistreated. Anywhere, everywhere. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying we can't do that, we shouldn't do that. I'm just wanting to be clear that when the author of Hebrews writes these words, remember those in prison, remember those being mistreated, he has in view brothers and sisters who are being persecuted, beaten up, ridiculed, Property's being taken away. You see what I'm saying here? I'm not trying to water it down. I'm just trying to make clear what the author, though, is actually saying. All right, but we need to ask the question, what would the implications then have been for the original readers to continue to remember, to visit, to care for the needs of those who were imprisoned and mistreated, to care for the families of those who were imprisoned and mistreated? What would have been the practical implications for those who were obeying these words? Well, it would have put them at risk, right? They would have been putting themselves at risk of being identified with the Christians, being identified as Christians themselves, and then subjecting themselves to seizure of their property, being beaten, being ridiculed, being thrown in jail. And so that's why the author, having said, listen, you're doing these things are getting bad, but you are still continuing to love the brothers. You are committed to them. You are accepting them. So don't forget, remember those. Keep on doing what you're doing, even though it means risk. So that's the quality here. Why is it that you keep visiting these Christian idiots in prison? It's because I'm a Christian. They're my brother. It's my sister. Oh, I see. Come on in. We've got a place for you. Don't forget to keep on doing that, even though it means risk. And so the principle of brotherly love that is implicit here is the principle of risk. To continue to love one another, to continue to love our brothers and sisters in Christ, to continue to be committed to them, to continue to love one another with open-handed acceptance and open-armed acceptance, even when that puts the self at risk. For us to continue to stand in solidarity with one another, even if it's going to cost us something. Even if it means going down with the family. And not in an abstract, oh, that sounds so beautiful to say it, I'll go down with the family. Not in an abstract sense, but in a real life, rubber hits the road, I'm going down with the family because we're family. And no matter what it costs me, I will identify with you, my brother and my sister. You know, we don't live in a time and a culture where Christians are being persecuted for their faith here yet. Not yet. Not yet. We may see that day in our lifetimes, and if we do, then we will need to remember this command of brotherly love, that this command of brotherly love calls us to sacrificial solidarity. We will need to remember Hebrews 13:3 in that day, church, that brotherly love calls for us to stand in sacrificial, self-sacrificing solidarity with our family in Jesus. I'll stand with you in Christ, and I'll go down with you in Christ because we're family. But until that day comes, for the time being, the risk of brotherly love will call us maybe not to sacrificial solidarity, but certainly to, inconvenient identification. Maybe not sacrificial solidarity, but inconvenient identification. A committed, open-handed acceptance and identification with one another, with our brothers and sisters in Christ, that still cost me the sacrifice of self, the inconveniences of time, the inconveniences of my energy, the inconveniences of my stuff, the inconveniences of my privacy, the inconveniences of my downtime, the inconveniences of me time. Risk. It's a risk to do that. But that's what real life, not philosophical, but real life brotherly love looks like. I'm getting out my clock here. Yeah, let me just tell you a quick story. It's sort of on point. It's a little bit off point, but let me tell you the story and explain why it's sort of off point. When I was pastoring in Chicago, there was a man in the vineyard there who just quite frankly got himself in really bad trouble. He did something very, very wrong. It was morally wrong. It was legally wrong. And thing went to court, and there was just a courtroom full of people who hated this man because what he did was horrible. It was awful. There's no other way to say it. And it was a mistake. He knew it was a mistake. He knew he shouldn't have done it, but he did it. And he was a Christ follower, an authentic Christ follower, and it was just a bad mistake. And I made a decision as a friend, as a pastor. I'm going to identify with you as a brother in Christ. And I sat by his side in court. And it was me and his lawyer and hundreds of people who were looking at him and me with just hate in their eyes. You know, and that's maybe a little bit of what it looks like to take the risk of, I'm going to identify with you. You're a brother in Christ. And who we are together in Christ is more important. All right, now, it's perhaps not a good example because it's kind of skewed by the fact that it was wrong. It was wrong, and I was not condoning what he did. I could have easily been one sitting in the gallery saying, "What did you do?" But I just made the choice. He knew this was wrong, and so I made the choice. I'm going to identify with you, my brother, and I will, I will, in a sense, go down with you and my reputation and the disgrace. I went down with his disgrace. And that's what it looks like in the face of persecution, church, for us to identify with one another. To stand up and say, I too am a Christ follower, and that's my brother, and that's my sister. And if they go down, I'm going to go down with them. Does that make sense? And I'm not implying go down with them in their wrongdoing. But we go down with one another in our solidarity, taking the risk that loving you and in Christ means we're all in this together. I don't know. Was that a helpful illustration? I don't know. Should I jettison it second service, or you kind of just, you can give me feedback after the service. Both feed in. That's what it looks like to have both feed in the community of faith. It's sacrificial solidarity. It's inconvenient identification with the family of Christ, because we're family. So both feed in. This is the challenge to us, church, to have both feed in, to be all in this church community. It's commitment to our brothers and sisters in Christ. It's acceptance of our brothers and sisters in Christ, the ones who are similar to us, the ones who are not similar to us, and it's the risk of loving them, no matter what. Let's stand. We'll wrap up there.